When in the midst of controversy and our beliefs, our passions are in question, why would we ever stand in silence? Instead of suffering silently, attempting to fit in or even rebel, we must choose our language that we must turn into action. Language is not just how we speak, it is the mannerism by which we hold ourselves. It is the presence which we carry with us, and the atmosphere we make when we walk into a crowded room. The first step in defining our language can be and is the realization that our language can be in action. Oftentimes we find ourselves afraid of the reaction when we speak. However, we don't realize that the consequences of staying silent are far worse than those of being refuted by our peers. We must not be afraid, for learning how to put fear into perspective gave Lord great strength, and it can for us too. That is our call to action, our call to put our fear of language into perspective. What even is perspective? The way we perceive something is by a particular attitude toward or a way of regarding something. Language is a way that we can express ideas. Ideas are contagious even if you don't agree with them. They will always be in your mind. Martin Luther King had the opportunity to speak and influence the lives of millions. His idea of racial equality may have started as a small moment, but grew into one of the most talked about social issues in their time. His choice to speak out against the national injustice led to one of the most celebrated and influential speeches in history. He was persecuted and tried in the worst conditions, but he did not falter in the presence of fear. Any fear of contempt, of censure, or some judgment was used as a strength to enlighten the world of such a delicate issue. Not all of us have the opportunity to make such an impression on the world, but we do have a duty and a right to speak the truth of our mind and our hearts. The greatest joy can be found from just changing the life of one person. Our success should not be measured by how many lives we change, but the change in one life that we can make. This is where perspective counts. Not to beat up on ourselves because we didn't set a record for the most lives changed, but to realize the importance your speech had on a single individual.
We work so hard to change the perspective of society, but few know that in order to truly change society, we need to start at the root. All throughout the nation, standards are being lessened or raised simply because of one's gender. Statistics are showing that the aptitude of males is slowly deteriorating in comparison of the aptitude of females. The New York Times reported in 2012 that some colleges are lowering the admissions requirements just so that they can admit a decent amount of men. Instead of the colleges bringing the requirements down, why doesn't the public school system reach out to help students before the college application process begins? They are forcing colleges to diminish their standards instead of calling on the youth to raise theirs. How can society progress if we routinely lower our expectations for them? We live in a society that no longer believes in the student-teacher relationships. They tend to ignore the sufferings of students because they believe it is not their place to intervene. They only reward the accomplishments of society's perfect student. Those who don't fit this cultural ideal get fed medicine instead of the simple interaction that would be much more effective. Everybody functions differently, but like Albert Einstein once said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then it'll spend the rest of its life believing that it is stupid. We might not all grow up to be the next Steve Jobs, but we all have a role and a responsibility in society. Even the roles that might seem inferior to some, they have a purpose. Society tends to downgrade and demean most of these responsibilities, but that's because they only seek the immediate satisfaction from their own success. Success comes in packages both big and small. Both are to be rewarded and celebrated, but all ends of the spectrum need to realize that their impact is just the same. The problem is not society, but the motivation and sense of responsibility of every individual, old and young, outgoing and fearful. The choice is yours.